The night my wife destroyed our marriage in front of 12 people, she made one critical mistake. She assumed I wasn't paying attention. "I'll forget you in a week. Already found someone better." That's what she said, standing at the head of our dining table, wine glass in hand, wedding ring landing in the centerpiece with a soft clink, sinking into the white roses like something dying. Her colleagues laughed. Her boss actually nodded, like he'd been waiting for this moment. And Simone, my wife, yanked off her wedding ring and threw it across the table like she was discarding a receipt. It landed in the centerpiece, a vase full of white roses she spent $40 on that morning. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I didn't ask her who he was, even though I already knew. I just wiped my mouth with a napkin, I pushed back my chair, and I stood up. "All right then," I said. "You've made your choice." And I walked out of that house without looking back, because Simone had just handed me exactly what I needed. She just didn't know it yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I take you back to how all of this started, tell me the time and where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far my stories travel. Consider liking and subscribing, but do it only if you like what I do here. Now, let me walk you back a bit. My name is Graham Pierce. I'm a furniture maker in Ashford, Vermont, a small town where people still wave at strangers and the winters last long enough to make you question your life choices. I build pieces by hand the way my father taught me, and his father taught him. Cherry wood, walnut, white oak. I know the grain of each one like I know my own fingerprints. For 5 years, I thought I knew my wife the same way. Simone Hartwell was a senior associate at Kessler & Brandt, a commercial real estate firm in Burlington, Vermont. She was sharp, driven, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made everyone else feel like they were standing in the wrong spot. I thought that confidence was beautiful. I thought it meant she knew who she was. Turns out, she just knew who she wanted people to think she was. That dinner party was her idea. She wanted to impress her boss, a man named Victor Kessler, who looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive upholstery. She spent 3 days preparing the menu, arranging the flowers, choosing the playlist. Everything had to be perfect. And it was, right up until dessert. That's when she stood up, tapped her glass like she was about to give a toast, and announced that she had something important to say. I watched her face as she spoke, the flush of alcohol on her cheeks, the slight tremor in her hand. She wasn't nervous, she was excited. She'd been rehearsing this, waiting for an audience. "I've been carrying this weight for too long," she said, pretending that this life was enough, pretending that I was happy settling. She looked at me when she said that word, settling, like I was a consolation prize she'd finally decided to return. "I've met someone who sees my potential, someone who understands ambition, and I refuse to spend another day smelling sawdust and pretending it's cologne." A few people laughed. Victor Kessler nodded slowly, like this was the most reasonable thing he'd ever heard. And Simone, my wife, yanked off her wedding ring and threw it across the table like she was discarding a receipt. It landed in the centerpiece, a vase full of white roses she spent $40 on that morning. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I didn't ask her who he was, even though I already knew. I just wiped my mouth with a napkin, I pushed back my chair, and I stood up. "All right then," I said. "You've made your choice." And I walked out of that house without looking back, because Simone had just handed me exactly what I needed. She just didn't know it yet. I met Simone 6 years ago at a craft fair in Burlington. I know, romantic, right? The furniture guy meets the future corporate climber between booths selling artisan honey and hand-poured candles. It sounds like the opening of a movie that ends badly, which I suppose it was. I had a booth that year showcasing a dining set I'd spent 5 months building. Solid black walnut, hand-carved joinery, a table so smooth you could see your reflection in the finish. I wasn't there to sell it. I'd already had a buyer lined up. I just wanted to show it off. Simone walked by 3 times before she finally stopped. She was wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, and she was holding a cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. She looked completely out of place, too polished, too sharp-edged for a crowd that was mostly flannel and hiking boots. But when she stopped at my booth, something shifted. She ran her fingers across the tabletop, slow and deliberate, like she was reading Braille. "You made this?" she asked. "Every inch," I said. She looked up at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not attraction exactly, more like calculation, like she was solving a puzzle she hadn't expected to find. "It's beautiful," she said. "There's something honest about it." I should have paid more attention to the way she said that word, honest, like it was a novelty, something quaint she'd discovered in the wild. But I didn't. I was too busy noticing the way her smile made her whole face change, the way she laughed when I told her about the 8 times I'd messed up the leg joints before getting them right. She gave me her number before she left. I called her the next day. We were married 14 months later. The early years were good, at least I thought they were. Simone seemed fascinated by my work. She'd come to the workshop on weekends and watch me sand and shape pieces together. She called it meditative. She said there was something pure about a man who built things with his hands. She even helped me pick out the sign for the shop, Pierce and Grain Custom Woodworks, her idea. She said it sounded established, trustworthy. Back then, she made me feel like what I did mattered, like I wasn't just building furniture, I was building something meaningful. I remember one night early in our marriage, lying in bed while she traced circles on my chest with her fingertip. "You're not like the men I work with," she said. "They talk about money like it's the only thing that's real, but you make things that will outlast all of us." I believed her. I believed every word. But looking back now, I realized something I missed at the time. She wasn't admiring me. She was collecting me. Like a conversation piece she could show off when it suited her and hide in the basement when it didn't. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It crept in like moisture under a finish, invisible at first, but slowly warping everything it touched. And by the time I noticed the damage, it was already too late to sand it out. The first time Simone insulted me in public, I told myself I'd misheard her. It was at a cocktail party her firm threw every year for top clients. I'd worn a blazer I thought looked decent. Apparently, I was wrong. "Graham builds furniture," Simone told a circle of executives, her hand resting on my arm like a leash. "It's like a little hobby, but he takes it very seriously." Hobby? I'd been running my own business for 12 years at that point. I'd built pieces that sat in governors' offices and 5-star restaurants. I'd been featured in 2 regional design magazines. But to her colleagues, I was the husband with the cute little hobby. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and sipped my drink and told myself she didn't mean it the way it sounded. That was my first mistake. The insults got more frequent after that. Small ones, always disguised as jokes. She'd mention that I came home smelling like a lumberyard when her friends were over. She'd laugh about how I didn't understand a real business the way she did. She'd introduce me at events with a slight pause before saying my profession, like she was deciding how to frame it. If you've ever had someone make you feel small in front of others, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 tiny cuts, type "I felt that" in the comments, because you already know exactly what I'm describing. She stopped coming to the workshop entirely about 2 years in, said she was too busy, said the sawdust irritated her allergies, which was funny since she'd never mentioned allergies before. But the real change was financial. I started noticing things, receipts that didn't make sense, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, new clothes appearing in her closet that she claimed were old even though I'd never seen them before. When I asked about our joint account, she got defensive, said I was being controlling, said she earned her money and could spend it however she wanted. Except she wasn't just spending her money. I checked the statements one night while she was working late, another late night and a string of late nights that had become suspiciously frequent. The numbers didn't add up. Transfers I didn't recognize, cash withdrawals that exceeded what we'd agreed on for monthly spending, a recurring charge at a spa in Burlington that cost more per visit than some families spend on groceries in a week. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. I didn't confront Simone about the money. Not yet. See, here's the thing about working with wood. You learn patience whether you want to or not. You can't rush a joint. You can't force a curve. You have to understand the material before you start cutting, or you'll ruin something that took months to grow. People aren't that different. So instead of asking questions she'd just lie her way around, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The way I do when I'm studying a piece of timber for hidden flaws. The cracks that don't show on the surface but will split the whole thing apart under pressure. I waited until she was asleep one night and went through the filing cabinet in our home office. She kept it locked, which should have been my first clue. Married couples don't usually lock filing cabinets unless they're hiding something they don't want found. The lock was cheap. A paperclip and 30 seconds of patience was all it took. Inside, I found a second credit card. Not a joint account, not one she'd ever mentioned. A platinum card in her name only, with a credit limit that made my chest tight when I saw it. The statements went back 18 months. I sat on the floor of that office at 2 in the morning, flipping through page after page of charges I'd never known existed. Boutique hotels I'd never heard of on nights she told me she was working late. Restaurants with French names and prices that suggested 2 people eating, not one. A jewelry store. A men's clothing shop. A men's clothing shop. I stared at that one for a long time. Simone didn't have brothers. Her father lived in Florida and they barely spoke. There was no reason for her to be buying men's clothing unless she was buying it for someone. Someone who wasn't me. The math started clicking into place like dovetail joints sliding together. The late nights, the business trips that kept getting longer, the way she'd started putting her phone face down whenever I walked into the room. She was having an affair. I don't know why it surprised me. Maybe because some part of me still wanted to believe I'd misread the situation. Maybe because admitting the truth meant admitting that I'd wasted 5 years of my life on someone who saw me as a stepping stone. But there it was, laid out in black and white on credit card statements she thought I'd never find. 18 months of lies, paid for with money she'd been hiding from our household budget. I put everything back exactly how I found it, relocked the cabinet, went back to bed. Simone was still sleeping, her face soft in the darkness, looking almost innocent. I lay there beside her and felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later. What I felt in that moment was clarity. Cold, clean, absolute clarity. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to give her a chance to spin this into something that was somehow my fault. I was going to document everything, gather every piece of evidence I could find, and when the time came, I was going to let the truth speak for itself. She thought I was simple. She thought I wasn't paying attention. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Over the next 4 months, I became a ghost in my own marriage. I smiled when she expected me to smile. I nodded when she talked about work. I made dinner on the nights she claimed to be home early, and I said nothing when she canceled at the last minute because something came up at the office. Something, right? Meanwhile, I built my case the way I build furniture, piece by piece, joint by joint, with a kind of patience that only comes from understanding that rushing leads to mistakes. I photographed every credit card statement. I screenshotted text messages when she left her phone unlocked. Careless, but she'd always underestimated me. I logged her mileage every time she came home, noting the discrepancies between where she said she'd been and how far she'd actually driven. The numbers never lied. She claimed to be at the Burlington office, a 40-minute round trip, but her odometer would show an extra 60 miles, sometimes 80. I mapped the hotels from her credit card statements. They were all in the opposite direction from her office, clustered in a wealthy suburb where people paid extra for discretion. If you've ever trusted someone who was lying to your face, you already know why people subscribe to stories like this. I kept everything in a lockbox at the workshop, hidden in the back of my tool cabinet behind a set of antique chisels I never used. Every receipt, every screenshot, every note I made about dates and times and discrepancies. Simone had no idea. She thought I spent my evenings in the workshop because I was avoiding her, which wasn't entirely wrong, but she never once considered that I might be preparing for something, that the quiet husband who built furniture might be capable of building something else entirely. A case. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know, sitting across from her at dinner, watching her lie with such casual ease and keeping my face neutral. There were nights when the anger rose up so hot I could feel it in my throat, but I swallowed it down every time. Because anger makes you sloppy, and I couldn't afford to be sloppy. There was one night, about 2 months before the dinner party, when she came home late, smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong and asked what was for dinner. I told her I'd made pasta. She said it smelled wonderful. And I stood there in my own kitchen, looking at this woman I'd married, this woman I'd built a life with, and I realized I didn't know her at all. Maybe I never had. That was the night I stopped hoping I was wrong. That was the night I started planning for what came next. The night of the dinner party, I drove straight to the workshop. I didn't go to a bar. I didn't call anyone to vent. I just sat in the dark among my tools and my timber and my half-finished projects, and I let the silence settle around me like sawdust. My phone started buzzing around midnight. First text from Simone. "Where are you? We need to talk about this." I didn't respond. Second text. "You can't just walk out like that. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I almost laughed at that one. Almost. By 2 a.m., the voicemail started. The first one was angry. She was screaming about how I'd ruined her moment, how I'd made her look foolish by leaving without a fight. Apparently, my calm exit hadn't played the way she'd expected. She'd wanted drama. She'd wanted me to beg. Instead, I'd given her nothing. The second voicemail was threatening. She was going to tell everyone what kind of person I really was. She was going to make sure I lost everything in the divorce. She was going to destroy my reputation in this town. And who would want to buy furniture from a man whose own wife couldn't stand him? By the fifth voicemail, the tone had shifted. Now she was crying. She didn't understand why I was being so cold. She thought we could talk this through like adults. Maybe she'd been hasty. Maybe she'd had too much wine. Maybe if I just came home, we could figure this out together. I saved every single message. 2 days later, her mother called. I'd met Vivian Hartwell exactly 4 times in 5 years of marriage, and each time she'd looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. But now she was calling me directly, her voice dripping with false warmth, asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss the situation. "Simone is very upset," she said. "She didn't mean those things she said. You know how she gets when she's stressed." "I know exactly how she gets," I said. There was a pause. I think Vivian heard something in my voice that surprised her. "Graham," she said carefully, "I hope you're not planning to do anything rash." "I'm not a rash person, Vivian. You should know that by now." I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. Not the cheapest one in town, but not the flashiest either. A woman named Catherine Holloway, who'd been practicing family law in Vermont for 23 years and had a reputation for being thorough, methodical, and utterly unintimidated by wealthy opponents. She listened to my story without interrupting. She looked at the evidence I'd brought, the credit card statements, the screenshots, the mileage logs, the timeline I'd constructed showing 18 months of systematic deception. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with something like respect. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "most people who sit in that chair are emotional wrecks. They want revenge. They want blood. They want me to destroy their spouse." "And me?" She smiled slightly. "You want something more dangerous. You want the truth on the record." She wasn't wrong. Simone didn't take the divorce filing well. I know this because 3 days after she was served, she showed up at my workshop unannounced, mascara streaked down her face, holding the papers like they'd personally insulted her. "You're suing me," she said it, like the concept was absurd, like I was a dog that had suddenly learned to speak. I was in the middle of sanding a tabletop, white oak, commissioned by a restaurant owner in Montpelier, and I didn't stop working, just kept running the sandpaper along the grain in long, even strokes. "It's a divorce filing, Simone, not a lawsuit. It says you're claiming I committed financial fraud, that I was unfaithful, that I—" She stopped, her voice cracking. "How could you put this in writing? Do you know what this will do to my reputation?" I finally looked up at her. She was shaking, but I couldn't tell if it was from rage or fear, maybe both. "You threw your wedding ring into a vase of roses and told a room full of people you'd already found someone better," I said calmly. "What exactly did you think would happen next?" She didn't have an answer for that. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, what she said under oath changed everything. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from her attorney, a man named Douglas Keene from a firm in Burlington that charged more per hour than I made in a day. The letter was full of legal language that essentially boiled down to this: Simone was going to countersue for emotional distress. She was going to claim that I had been financially controlling throughout our marriage. She was going to paint me as the villain and herself as the victim of psychological manipulation. I read the letter twice, then I filed it away with everything else. Catherine Holloway called me that afternoon. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "It's a standard tactic. Make enough noise, throw enough accusations, and hope you'll settle just to make it stop." "Will it work?" I asked. "Not if you don't let it." I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Mr. Pierce, I've been doing this for over 2 decades. I've seen every trick in the book, and I can tell you right now, they don't have a case. They have a narrative, and narratives fall apart when they meet evidence." She was right. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late November, the kind of gray Vermont day when the sky looks like concrete and the cold seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I put on the suit I'd worn to my father's funeral. It still fit. I drove to the courthouse with my lockbox of evidence in the passenger seat and a strange sense of calm in my chest. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand wooden benches, no dramatic lighting, just fluorescent bulbs, plastic chairs, and a judge's bench that looked like it had seen better decades. Simone was already there when I arrived, surrounded by her support team. Her mother, Vivian, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral. Douglas Keene shuffling papers with practiced confidence, and Simone herself wearing a conservative blouse and minimal makeup, looking every inch the wronged wife seeking justice. She didn't look at me, not once. The judge was a man in his 60s named Harold Beckett. He had the weary expression of someone who had heard every lie humans could tell each other and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He called the proceedings to order and asked Catherine to present our case. She was magnificent. She walked Judge Beckett through the timeline methodically, presenting each piece of evidence with the precision of a surgeon: the hidden credit card, the 18 months of secret charges, the mileage logs showing Simone had driven hundreds of miles to places she'd never mentioned, the text messages, the voicemails, the pattern of financial deception that painted a clear picture of a woman who had been lying to her husband for nearly 2 years. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Douglas Keene stood up and launched into his prepared defense: emotional abuse, financial control, a husband who made his wife feel trapped and desperate. He painted me as a cold, withholding man who had driven Simone into the arms of another because I had failed to meet her emotional needs. It was a compelling performance. I almost believed it myself. Then Judge Beckett started asking questions. "Mr. Keene," he said, "your client claims Mr. Pierce was financially controlling, yet these bank records show he paid the majority of household expenses, while Mrs. Pierce maintained a secret credit account with a substantial limit. Can you explain how that constitutes control?" Keene fumbled, something about psychological pressure and coerced dependence. The judge wasn't buying it. "And Mrs. Pierce," he turned to Simone directly, "these mileage logs show significant discrepancies between your stated locations and your actual travel. On 14 separate occasions over a 4-month period, you drove an average of 60 miles more than your commute would require. Can you explain where you were going?" Simone's face went pale. I sometimes took the scenic route to clear my head." 60 miles of scenic route, 14 times? She didn't answer. Judge Beckett looked down at the evidence in front of him, then back at Simone. "Mrs. Pierce, I'm going to ask you directly. Who is P.W. in these text messages?" The room went very still. Simone looked at her lawyer. Keene whispered something urgently, but she was already unraveling, her composure cracking like varnish under heat. "His name is Preston Waverly," she finally said. I didn't know who Preston Waverly was, but clearly Keene did. It came out in pieces over the next few minutes, dragged into the light by the judge's pointed questions. Preston Waverly was the son of Bennett Waverly, the founder and majority owner of Waverly Development Group, the largest commercial real estate client of Kessler and Brandt. Preston was engaged to the daughter of a state senator. The wedding was scheduled for spring. Simone hadn't just been having an affair, she'd been having an affair with the most dangerous possible person, someone whose family had the power to destroy her career with a single phone call. Moments like this are exactly why I started paying closer attention, because the truth doesn't announce itself, it hides until you know where to look. The fallout was immediate. Judge Beckett ruled in my favor on every count. Simone was ordered to pay back the funds she had diverted from our joint accounts over 18 months. The divorce would proceed with a full accounting of assets, and given the documented infidelity and financial deception, I would be entitled to a significantly larger share than Vermont's standard equal division. But that wasn't the part that destroyed her. News travels fast in small professional circles. By the end of the week, Bennett Waverly knew everything. I heard what happened next through the grapevine, through Catherine, who had contacts at every firm in Burlington, and through the quiet whispers of people who couldn't wait to share the details. Preston Waverly, faced with a choice between his secret affair and his advantageous engagement, did exactly what men like him always do. He threw Simone under the bus so fast she probably had tire marks on her back. He claimed she had pursued him, manipulated him, threatened to expose their relationship if he didn't continue seeing her. He painted himself as the victim of a calculating woman who had targeted him for his family's wealth and connections. His fiancée, the senator's daughter, publicly forgave him. They released a joint statement about working through this difficult time and the importance of second chances. The wedding was still on. Simone, meanwhile, was finished. Victor Kessler called her into his office the Monday after the court hearing. She walked out 20 minutes later carrying a cardboard box and a severance agreement that included a strict non-disclosure clause. The Waverlys made sure she was blacklisted from every major firm in Vermont. Word spread that she was difficult, unstable, a liability waiting to happen. Her professional reputation, the thing she had valued above everything else, including our marriage, was in ashes. I didn't feel good about it. Not exactly, but I didn't feel bad either. She had made her choices, every single one of them, and choices have consequences, even when you're convinced the rules don't apply to you. I threw myself into work after the divorce was finalized, expanded the workshop, finally bought that second bandsaw I'd been eyeing for years, took on bigger commissions, built a dining set for a governor's mansion in New Hampshire, got featured in a regional design magazine that called my work honest craftsmanship in an age of disposable everything. And slowly, carefully, I started to feel like myself again. There was a woman, her name was Nina, who brought in her late mother's rocking chair for restoration. It was a beautiful piece, hand-carved maple at least 80 years old. The joints were loose and the finish was worn, but the bones were solid. We talked while I examined the chair. She told me about her mother, about growing up in that house, about the way some objects hold memories even when the people who made them are gone. I understood. We had coffee a few times, then dinner, then more dinners. Nothing rushed, nothing desperate, just two people who understood that good things take time. But something still didn't feel finished. Something was still waiting. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, on a cold evening in late March when the last stubborn snow was still clinging to the shadows, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside my workshop. I wasn't expecting anyone. Nina had gone home hours ago. The last customer had picked up their commission that morning. I was alone with a half-finished bookcase and the smell of fresh-cut cedar, the way I liked it. The knock came soft, almost apologetic. I opened the door and found Simone standing there. She looked like a different person. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a coat that didn't fit quite right and jeans that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no armor. Just a woman who looked like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. She was shivering. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I stepped aside. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because it was cold, and turning her away felt unnecessarily cruel. She walked into the workshop and stopped when she saw the bookcase I'd been working on. Cherry wood, hand-carved details, the kind of piece that takes months to get right. "You always made beautiful things," she said quietly. "I never told you that enough." I didn't respond. I just waited. She turned to face me, arms wrapped around herself, the same way they'd been the day we met, back when I thought she was something worth protecting. I made a mistake. So many mistakes. I know that now. Preston was nothing. He used me and threw me away the second it became inconvenient. And the worst part is, she laughed bitterly, the worst part is I deserved it. I did the same thing to you. I just didn't see it until it was too late. She took a step closer. Her eyes were wet. I've been thinking about you every day since the trial. Not because of the money, not because of what I lost, because you were the only person who ever looked at me like I was real, like I mattered for who I was, not what I could do for them. Her voice cracked. And I threw that away for what? Hotel rooms and expensive dinners and a man who couldn't even remember my birthday. She reached toward my hand. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you worse than I've ever hurt anyone, but I'm asking anyway. Can we try again? I'll be different, I promise. I'll be the person you thought I was when we first met. I looked at her hand reaching toward mine, and I thought about rot. See, here's the thing about rot that people don't understand unless they work with wood. Rot isn't just on the surface, it works its way into the grain, breaking down the fibers from the inside, creating weakness that spreads invisibly until the whole structure gives way without warning. You can sand it, you can stain it, you can make it look perfect from the outside, but the rot is still there, waiting. Some wood is too damaged to save. You learn to recognize it, that soft give when you press your thumb against the grain, the faint smell of decay beneath the finish. When the rot goes deep enough, there's nothing left to build on. You just have to let it go. I stepped back from her reaching hand. Simone, I said, and my voice was calm and steady and completely without anger. She looked at me, waiting, hoping. The workshop was silent except for the wind outside and the faint creak of old timber settling. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on the highway, its headlights briefly sweeping across the windows before disappearing into the dark. I thought about the 5 years we'd spent together, the good moments and the bad ones, the woman I'd thought she was and the woman she'd actually been, the lies and the truths and the slow erosion of everything I'd believed in. I thought about Nina and the rocking chair and the way some things can be restored if the bones are still solid. And I thought about the vase full of white roses and a wedding ring sinking into the water and a woman who looked me in the eyes and told me she'd forget me in a week. Simone was still waiting, still hoping, still reaching. I opened my mouth to answer her. And that's where I'm going to leave this, for now. Tell me which part of this story hit you the hardest. Tell me what you would have said if you were standing where I was standing. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you want more stories like this, you already know what to do. If you think this is where it ends, it's not. There's another story waiting that will make this feel even heavier. Click the video on your screen. I'll meet you there.